computer. Okay, we're now recording, and we have our cast of thousands here, Jeannie, and I'm going to share my screen. And you know, the downside of that is she's got to put up with all my jokes, but I am going to start off with Lightroom. And you can see here, Jeannie, that I didn't take that many pictures. Okay, so just for the benefit, I'm gonna highlight, start the first one, and go here. And I'm just gonna go through just so you can see all the different pictures. And the difference between these two is mainly just cloud formation. This one here, I changed my ISO down to 100, which was going to be my shooting ISO, and I shot it for 30 seconds at f14. So it's kind of checking the f-stop and the the exposure time, and just kind of get a feel for where I wanted to be. And I did this one here. Now, if you'll notice between these two, the scene shifts a little. This one here, second one, I like a little better because you don't have the highlights of the car's headlights on the lower left. But my bad, because the reason this shifts a little is because the tripod shifted slightly. I don't know why, but that's why I would always tell everybody, be sure and keep your tripod straight. So
okay, I'm glad you're mortal.
So then I had this one, and this one here was a test shot because it was 180 seconds, otherwise known as 3 minutes, and ISO 100. And so this is what I expected the sky to look like, more or less. And this is what I expected the exposure to look like, more or less, during the streak shot. So I could tell right away that I was not going to need to do extensive light painting, because all this is all lit up. And for those who don't realize it, this area right here, anytime you've got a point of light with a fairly restricted shutter setting, aperture setting, in this case I had f18, you're going to get that starburst effect. And a lot of people find that very desirable to do that. And then I had this streak shot. So let me just show you the difference between, so you can see what I've already done in Lightroom. This particular shot is as more or less straight out of camera, okay? And then if you look at that, you'll see, and this is why I mentioned the folks that were there, you always want to save it in RAW because you can make corrections. These are my corrections. Can you tell the difference? Okay, there's the corrections. Corrections straight out of camera.
Oh, yeah.
You don't realize it with your human eye, but these, especially these non-photographic bright lights that light everything up, cast an absolutely terrible hue. And so what I did was I went into Lightroom and I went to the develop settings over here. I changed, if you look on the right, I changed the temperature and the tint a little bit, brought the highlights down a little bit, brought the whites down considerably because they were blown out if you were to look at a histogram. And that's about all I changed there. And then I went down to the color tab, and you can see under luminance, I brought the yellows and the greens down. I brought the oranges up a little bit. And then in saturation, I brought the oranges up a little bit. I brought the yellows and the greens down. And then in hue, you can see I brought the yellows down. So that's what changed this from being a very poor setting from the lights that were on the scene, which are right here, to the lights that I wound up wanting right there. Okay. So having done that, I take the lights that I want, and if you right click on there and you go down to develop settings and you go copy settings, it'll give you all of the things that you have changed and all of the things that are in effect when you copy the settings. You can add other things, but you generally take what Lightroom gives you, and you hit copy, okay? Then you go to the picture you want to make it effect. Again, right click, develop settings, paste. And if you watch, you'll notice that that picture changed. So it has the exact same settings that you did on this picture now apply to this picture. And they're almost, you can't tell because they were taken at the exact same time. They're gonna have the same lighting and so on. So it does that. I did that exact same copy and paste of develop settings to my streak shot, which is right here. So now what I'm going to do is that it's recorded. Is this? Oh, it's recorded. Jeannie says it's recorded. So here's my streak shot.
Well, only my husband keeps going in and out. He doesn't know it's being recorded. I
Oh, okay.
suggested use a
That's all
different
right.
door.
That's all right. He's an entertainer, I can tell. So I'm going to take this shot and what I want for foreground, even though as luck would have it, they're almost the same on this particular. And you hold down the control key and click it, and that allows you to select more than one picture. So once I've done that, I've got the two pictures I want to take into Photoshop. And I go up at the top and I hit Photo. And I come down to Edit In. And you go over to the submenus here and you go all the way to the bottom and it says Open as Layers in Photoshop. And I'm going to select that. So those two images are going to go into Photoshop and they will open as layers on a single image. And then you can flip back and forth between them on the layers. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about how we're going to develop those. And this is where you cue the Jeopardy theme song because we're waiting for it to load. Okay. I'm gonna put you over here, I guess. Okay. Can you see that Photoshop? I think I have to stop and then reload here. I'm gonna stop. No, I changed programs, so I had to go over and do that.
Right.
So I'm gonna do that. Share. Okay, now you see in my Photoshop, right?
Right.
Okay. So if you look off to the right, I have two layers. Okay. One layer is the scene that I corrected and you saw before when I was in Lightroom. And the other layer is the one with the streak. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can just get this thing to go like that. Okay, so I'm going to turn off the top layer. Boy, this really slows down when I'm doing the zoom thing. I'm going to turn off the top layer and there's the zoom. Okay, now as I zoom in, you see that it, even though it looks broken on the screen a little bit, it's not. It's a continuous yellow light. So you can see that. Okay, so there's my shot. That's almost good enough the way it is. To be honest with you, I don't know as if I would change too much, but I'll show you what I am going to change. You have to remember that the layer that's on the top on the right is the layer that you're going to see. The layer that's on the bottom will come through depending on the blend mode. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm not going to touch the streak layer at all. I am going to go to the layer that doesn't have the streak in it, and I am going to hit image, adjustments, brightness and contrast. And I'm going to crank up the brightness on that. And if you look, it's getting way too bright in the foreground over here. But if you look off in the lower right, you'll see a couple things. You'll see clouds that are brighter, and you'll see there's a couple of boats down there that are even brighter still. Okay, so I want to highlight those boats a little bit and bring them out. So I'm going to kick up the brightness to 150. I don't know if I can get any higher than that. Probably not. No, 150 is as far as I can go. And it's going to nag me about it, of course. And hit OK. I wanted to bring those boats up a little bit more. So with that layer still highlighted, I'm going to use a different method. And I'm going to go up here to filter, camera raw filter. And this brings up a routine similar to Lightroom, where I can do individual adjustments to the image, just like I did in Lightroom. And in this particular case, what I want to do, again, the boats in the lower right, I want to bring them up and make them much more visible. So I'm going to just take my exposure up. And you see how those boats get very, very visible, and the bridge and so on gets a lot more visible. So I would like something like that in my finished picture. So I'm going to hit OK. So here's my finished picture. And notice when I do that, you'll see in the sky, which you don't have to worry about, but there's little teeny droplets of dew on the lens. There's the stars streaking all over the place and all that, all of which is going to be eliminated, because what I'm going to do is on that layer, I'm going to go down to the bottom right, and I'm going to select this little icon that it says add a layer mask. So I click that, and this layer mask is white, and that means everything is being seen, okay? So what I want to do is change that to black so nothing is seen. So I'm going to hit, again, hold the control key and hit with this selected, and see the little white lines around that, okay? So with this selected, I'm going to hit Control I, and it goes to full black. And so now nothing in that particular image is being seen. Everything I see is in the bottom image. So what I want to do is lighten this lower right-hand corner a little bit, because you've got a distinct difference in brightness and detail between the lower right corner and the rest of the foreground. So I do that, and I want to paint with a white brush, and the white brush will bring out that portion of that layer. So down here, I'm going to make sure white is selected, and I'm going to go up and I'm going to find my paintbrush. There's my paintbrush tool, and you can see that's how big it is right now. Now I can make that bigger or smaller by selecting the bracket keys, left or right, makes it bigger or smaller. Okay, and the other thing you can do is if you go up here to this particular icon where it's showing 1300, that's how many pixels, it shows you the size and it shows you the hardness. I don't want a real hard selection. If I have a 2 or a 1%, that gives me very, very fuzzy edges. If I was way over here, close to 100%, the edge of this circle would be a very, very hard circle. So I want it to be fuzzy. So I want it to be down here in the 4 or 5% range. Now it's going to be fuzzy. Okay, then I hit OK. The other thing that I want to look at is opacity and flow. And I'm going to take the flow down a little bit to about 70%. And all that means is it only dumps about 70% each time I pass. The opacity means it gives it everything that I'm going to give it. I don't want that either. I want it about 50%. And so what that does is it allows me to be a little bit more artistic with it and change it and blend it in more slowly. Okay, so I'm going to bring this section of the picture into play. And I think that's a little bit too big, so I'm going to use the left bracket to downsize it. And now when I go across there, you'll see it lights up a little bit. So now what I have is I have a lightened up section in the lower right. And you can see kind of got the edge of the sky that I didn't want to, but that's all right. We'll fix that here shortly. But that brings that out. So I'm going to bring this down. And I also want to go up and I want to make it harder because I'm going to get closer to the edge. So I'm going to bring it up somewhere in that area. And now I want to go back and make it black. I want to, in the lower left here, I want to make this black because I want to erase what I just did. So I'm going to come along here and I'm just along the bridge and along the top of the lights. And you can see that I'm erasing that glow that appeared. And I'm actually going to move my opacity already all the way up, flow all the way up. So that glow that I just put in the sky, I want to take that out. I don't want that in there. All I want is the lights of the raw image to show. So you can see that I've taken that out. So now I have the natural sky in there, but I have effectively lit up the water and those boats in the foreground, and it gives me a more balanced foreground. So that's just a little bit of tinkering. And that's kind of there's other ways to do that. You can light paint when you're on the scene, but that it was so far away, it would be difficult to light. So that just, when we're done with that, that's all we see. And so I'm about done. That's my picture right there. I don't know much more what I would do to it. Well, let me correct that. I'm going to make a small change, and it's what I do with most of my street shots. I'm going to make a small change. Since I'm happy with all of this, okay, there's no need at this point for me to keep these layers separate. So I will just merge them. So I just, again, using the control key and clicking, I've got them both highlighted, and I right click and I go merge layers. So it took everything I've done up until now and made it a single layer, okay? I apologize for you Mac users. I'm using Windows. I think most everybody knows that the control key and the
Command
key, that's the one, command key, do about the same thing. But I can't vouch for that. I'm gonna move you over a little bit, Jeannie. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to select the entire picture. And again, our human eye doesn't always see clearly what the camera is seeing, and we resolve it in our own brain, but we don't really resolve it on the surface. So that's what we have to do. So I've just put the marching ants around the entire picture, and then I've gone up and I've selected the move tool, okay? And when I do that, I put little handles on. Now, if you look at my cursor, I can move it around a little bit, okay? Okay. You can see the little hooks that are on the middle of each section and also in the corners. Now, if I was to move that by just clicking, holding, and moving, all I'm going to do is change the size of the picture. I don't want to do that. Okay, so I'm going to hold that. But what I do want to do is look down here in the lower left corner. You know that all of these fence posts don't all lean to the right. And then about the middle of the picture, they seem to be straight up and down. And you see that piling isn't leaning to the left, yet these pilings are straight. And that's because when you tilt your camera to upwards to catch the streak in the sky, what you have effectively done is distorted the light and how it is recorded on your camera. So what I want to do is make this straight. So I do that by putting my cursor here and holding the command or control key, click and hold, and now I'm moving just that cursor, okay? And so you can see I move it to about here, and I want the bottom to be flush so I don't go above or below on the bottom. But how do I know how far to go? I know how far to go because that little sign that I pointed out before is now perfectly straight up and down, like the edge over here is straight up and down, okay? I'm gonna go over here and do the same thing on the right, and I will be looking at basically this here, this one right here at the boat, and I want that straight up and down relative to the outer part. Again, command or control, click, hold, and move it. And when that looks straight to me, and it looks straight right about there, I let go, okay? Now that is a more natural representation of the foreground and what's straight up and down. And you can see it kind of distorts the entire picture. So what I do next, I stop the ants, okay? Stop the ants. How do I stop the ants? It's got to catch up with me. There we go. Okay, Control D stops the ants. So it changes the perspective of the arch a little bit because it's more, it arches more, but it's more realistic because these are all vertical now. Okay. But you notice when you do that, now when I go to crop here, I am going to crop all the way to the top. And then I'm going to crop all that area that I'm not going to use. In other words, till it's just about the bottom. Where is it? Bring this down to the bottom. And then bring this in over here. Okay, I hit click. So now I have what is more realistic on the streak shot, but I lost a lot of the sky in the upper right and sky in the upper left. And that is something you want to always keep in mind when you're out shooting, that if you're going to make this vertical correction, you're going to lose some of that area in the upper right and upper left. So if you have something that you absolutely want to have, you have to take that into consideration when you're doing your composing and leave plenty of room to do this. Now, I also take, instead of accepting a perfect square, I change it a little bit here. And this again is just, at this point, it's all artistic technique, whatever you like. So I'll go down here to image, and I go to image size. And I can change the number of pixels. Currently, I'm 5,000 and some change wide and 4,400 high. And there's a little lock here that tells me that when I change one, the other one changes in proportion. So if I wanted to make this 4,000 wide, it would go down to like 3,200 or whatever. It would change proportionally. If I click that lock, I can now change one without changing the other. So my height is fine, 44, but I would like my width a little bit wider. Or conversely, I could make it the other way around. I could leave the width the way it is and change the height and make the height a little smaller. So I am going to make this 5,500. Okay. Now watch what happens when I hit OK. I'll get this out of the way over here. It's going to make this more like it used to be, in other words, wider than tall, and it'll stretch things out a little bit. So I hit OK. And you see how that made it a little bit wider? And so that gives me a little bit more flexibility as far as framing and everything else. It does distort things a little bit. So this is not distorted, is the wrong word. It stretches this out a little bit. So it's unrealistically wider than it was. So again, this is a technique that you can use. It's not something that everybody needs to use, but it's what I do when I drag those corners and straighten it. You don't even have to drag the corners and straighten it if you don't want to. Just understand that you're not going to get the verticals to be vertical over here in the corners when you had taken your picture with your camera pointed into the sky. So that's about it. I'm just going to hit save for now. And it's going to go back and save this as a TIFF file, basically. And I would be able to open that and do further tinkering if I wanted to in Lightroom. One of the things that I would look at here is there's a lot of black up here. So I might go into and do, if I do a 4x6, I can take this down and effectively do what I did before. And I have a 4x6 like I had before. without all that blackness in there. It got the entire streak, and it's the same ratio that came out of your camera, but you've straightened the verticals, and you still have all the streak in there. So I kind of like that. I will save that. Because basically all I've done is dump black sky. And so that's it. And you can go on and crop and resize and do whatever you like. And when you go back to Lightroom, there it is. It's all done in Lightroom right there. And you can look at it to your heart's content in Lightroom.
Very nice, Gordy.
So that's,
yeah.
yes, go ahead.
What was that tool that you did to straighten it with the marching ants? What was that tool?
Let me go back to, hang on here, stop, pause. Oh, there I am again. Darn it. Okay, I'm going back to Photoshop. Okay, when you want to straighten it, and I'll just use this here because it happens to be here. But in the upper left, you got the small, looks like marching ants. It's the rectangular marquee tool.
Right.
Okay, I use that, and I use that to highlight the entire picture. And you can see that when you have the entire picture highlighted, you have the little marching ants going around it. Okay.
Yeah.
Now what you want to do is adjust it. So you take the tool right above that looks like the plus sign with arrows on it, and it's called the move tool. And you select that. And so now just do a quick zoom in, zoom out, and it puts those little handles on the corners. Okay.
Right.
So that's all you're doing is you're moving it.
Okay.
If you move it without holding your control key, all you're doing is moving it proportionally. Or you unlock up here. There's a lock somewhere where you can unlock it, and you can just resize it any way you want. It's kind of a wild card resizing tool. But when you hit the control key, these little handles become movable one at a time without affecting the other 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, the other 7. And so that's how I move. And you can make it any way you want. I mean, you can go crazy here. So the next time that Pat has a creative competition, you could really make some creative stuff with this. And you could bring this in like that. You could say, wow, that's cool. I think I'll do that. And then you take your dripper toolbox here, and you can make that black, or any color you want. You could do this. And then do that. And there you go. There's nothing I would ever do like that. Why would you do that? It's just crazy. But the technique is you hold your command or control key, click and move one of those handles, and you're moving just the one handle. And that's what I do to straighten things out.
Okay.
I am going
I didn't know
to
that.
close this. Do not save it. I do not want to save that mess. So I am going to close this, and I think due to one of the limitations here, I'll go back to Lightroom. And I'm back in Lightroom, and now I can tinker with them to my heart's content. And I can resize them, and I can do whatever I want in Lightroom. If you need to tinker with you didn't need to tinker with it at all any further. But here's what wound up being the finished product.
Very nice. Very nice.
And the difference between this one, which was the raw streak shot, you look down the lower right and you got this kind of black or dark hole. But this one here, you've artificially, instead of light painting, you used a layer, brightened the layer like crazy, and then just blended it in. And I did that mainly because I wanted to show the layering and the blending and the layering
Mhm.
when you put them together. So that's it. That's my streak shot. It's going out on Instagram here in a couple minutes. So that's it.
Okay. Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for taking us down there and showing us the Photoshop tools.
No problem.
combine
Thank
it.
you for being my paid audience on this. She was compensated for this performance, folks. So thank you, Jeannie.
All right, my pleasure. All
See you
right,
later.
Gordy. Well, thanks a lot. Bye-bye
All right.
now.
Bye.